You know what? I think that a lot of poets would probably, denote various points in their lives that kind of reaffirmed the direction that they were going as, writers, as artists. But the first time that I knew, particularly with spoken word, that I had a proclivity was I had a teacher by the name of Sister Karen. I went to St. Andrews Elementary School. And Sister Karen gave us this assignment to read this poem with the hopes that somebody the next day would come back and, recite it. And I remember thinking, the poem was a page long, and I remember thinking these are a lot of words here or whatever, but didn't think much of it, took it home, read it a couple of times, came back. The next day, she asked in the class if anybody was interested in, reading the poem or whatever. And nobody volunteered, of course. But I was volunteered. She said, hey, Azizi, can you, would you be kind enough to do so? And I didn't realize until I started reading the poem and reciting the poem that I actually had it memorized from the couple of times that I read it the night before. And the poem is, in winter, I get up at night and dress by yellow candlelight. In summer, quite the other way, I have to go to bed by day. I have to go to bed and see the birds still hopping on the tree, or hear the grown-up people's feet still buzzing past me in the street. And does it not seem hard to you when all the sky is clear and blue and I should like so much to play to have to go to bed by day? The name of the poem is Bed in Summer. I'm not sure who the author is, but I had the poem memorized from the 2 times that I read them the night prior to. And as a kid, probably 4th, 5th grade, that was like a superpower to me that I didn't know that I had until that moment. So I think that was the first time that, from a spoken word perspective, I discovered poetry and discovered that I was a poet. I've been writing all my life. I can pretty much write to fit whatever the occasion is, whether it's grants, technical writing, whether, it's, fiction, whether it's a story, whatever the case may be. But I like the fact that poetry doesn't have a lot of rules. So being unconfined is something that has been important to me in my life. And I found a freedom in poetry that from an early age, I really appreciated. I think I realized the power of poetry probably, poetry is everywhere. We have a friend, my good friend, Cesar Toriano, and he always says poetry can be anything and anything can be poetry. So if we are talking specifically about the written and spoken word, I think it's just I've seen the ability for art to kind of be the medicine inside of the candy. You can say a lot of things artistically that you can't necessarily say conversationally without having to do a lot of unpacking and perhaps even, offending somebody, right? But I think that if you are able to put the message into the music, if you're able to put the message into a rhythm, if you're able to put the message behind a beat or in front of a beat or rap music around it, it's just a lot more palatable. So I come from a rather revolutionary background. I'm a student of the Black Panthers. I'm a student of Marcus Garvey, Kwame Ture, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, right? So from a resistance standpoint, poetry has been really important to me. And I kind of categorize poetry, broadly. Hip hop is some of my favorite poetry. Some of my favorite poets are hip hop, artists. And some of my favorite hip hop artists are, the people that utilize their platform to evoke social change and to perpetuate culture in a positive way. So I think that the power of poetry is limitless, and I've seen it manifest in various ways throughout my life. Poetry is potential. Poetry is always working to turn the potential into something kinetic. It is the push and the energy that life allows for us, and trying to explain all of the strange things that go on around us that the greatest philosophers that, we've known on this planet Earth still haven't necessarily figured out. It's the consistent challenge of explaining the times and your emotions, and it's the ability to have nuanced conversation that somehow can also be timeless if read 100, 200 years from now. I think poetry is something that anybody can do. It's something that everybody does do. It's something that many people don't do well because of the fact that, we've all written a poem at some point in time, in our life. Everybody's a poet. If you've ever struggled to say something and then it ended up coming out perfectly, or if you ever struggled to write something and then it ended up, being exactly what you were trying to convey, that's a version of poetry. So I think that I just think that there's a lot of power, especially whether it's the written word, whether it's the spoken word. There's a lot of power in being able to concisely articulate whatever it is that you're trying to convey, or abstractly articulate whatever it is you're trying to convey, even if you don't know what you're trying to convey. It is peaceful because I don't really push myself that much anymore to write when I am not feeling it. So I really made it a point over the past few years in particular to write exclusively for myself. I've been hosting for a long time. Probably 20 or so years. And when you host, your responsibilities are distinctly different than when you are the artist is being presented. So as a host, I always made sure that I had pieces that were universally palatable, that were, almost pop, right? Like popular, pop music, right? You have pop poetry, things that everybody is going to get the crowd moving, things that are going to evoke a positive response, things that that if, the show is going down the tubes, I can pull this piece out, and no matter who's in the room, it's going to bring the room back together. And it's cool to be able to have those pieces, and I do have those pieces, but the reason why I started writing poetry is because I'm an only child, right? So I didn't have brothers and sisters to bounce a lot of ideas, off of. Of course, I had, my homies in the neighborhood, so to speak. But, when you don't have like that direct sibling, influence or whatever, your thoughts have to go somewhere. And mine, went in my notebook. So my writing process has evolved over the years because there was a point that I would sit down and literally try to write like every day. It's like the kid in high school that's trying to make the football team. So he's in the weight room popping creatine. He's in there 3 days out of the week, and he's trying to, he's doing the same 2 exercises, but he's really trying to bust his butt to get on the team, and I was really writing from a very hungry standpoint for a lot of my youth, from a competitive standpoint, listening to other poets, listening to spoken word artists, getting the deaf poetry, Russell Simmons' deaf poetry tapes or whatever, and watching them with my dad and just studying the different artists and their stage presence, their various stage presences, and how they communicated and how they their various styles on stage and charismas and these different things. And I think that it's when you are a young artist trying to find your voice and you're a young, hungry artist trying to find your voice, it's important to be a sponge. But as one gets older and one's voice begins to change and you speak with the voice that is your voice and not the voices that you have been given by, your various influences, you have a responsibility to tell your truth and to speak your truth and to speak your story. And that's what I do now. I don't tell anybody else's story. I just tell my own. And anyone that invites me on stage kind of has to, understand that they're going to, you brought me here for a reason. You brought me here to do a job. Let me do my job, and the job will be done. That's not to say that for a youth group I won't edit myself, of course, absolutely 100%. But when it comes to adults, if I'm brought on stage or whatever, like you're not gonna give me a theme of unicorns and expect me to stay on theme, I knew I was a writer. We discussed. I know I was a poet for a long time, ever since Sister Karen's class. At St. Andrews. And it's really funny because I literally never read that poem again, and I still somehow have it committed to memory. I love rhythm. Rhythm does that. I have poems that I absolutely love that I have written that I just cannot memorize to save the life of me, and I've read them probably thousands of times. It's because they don't have a certain, iambic pentameter or a rhythm that's consistent enough for it to be sing-songy enough for me to kind of get it stuck in my head, right? So there's a science to it. But as far as the influences on poetry, we spoke earlier a little bit about my good buddy, my mentor, I call him my big brother, Greg Bliss. He had a spot, the old Morningstar coffee shop off of Division, Morningstar 76, I believe it was. And he had a space in the back. And this is during the day and age where you could smoke inside of establishments, right? But this space in particular was smoky even by the era's standards, right? It's almost like you watch Mad Men and how everybody just has a cigarette and you're like, oh my goodness, right? It's like that. It's that sort of situation, right? In the back of Morningstar. And I was rolling with a good friend of mine, man, my man, Martin Shepard. And we were, we prided ourselves on being somewhat ahead of our time and being, sophisticated. He was more sophisticated than I was at the time because he was a lawyer. He's probably still more sophisticated than I am. But we took a certain amount of pride in putting ourselves in spaces where you didn't see a lot of people that look like Martin and I, right? So we would venture to different, night spots. We would venture to different, coffee shops, different lounges, these different places or whatever. And, in search of poetry, in search of culture. And one day we ended up at Morningstar. And it was like stepping into a very weird, very free kind of alternate literary poetic, theatrical dimension. Very cool atmosphere, very free atmosphere, and a lot of really dope artists. And Greg, of course, at the helm. And he is hilarious, first of all. Like, he is, Greg in host mode, juggling, a bunch of different people and having like 8 or 9 notebooks or whatever. He's dropping papers around. It's just like the most like beautifully disorganized, organized, chaotic sort of situation like ever. And I just watched this guy, just take control of rowdy crowds, take control of crowds of people that weren't necessarily there for, whoever was on stage or whatever was going on. And I really appreciated just his ability to keep people focused and keep control of the room in his very own unique way. Much like a lot of things in Grand Rapids, though, the space was maybe diverse in thought, but very monolithic as far as the people were concerned. And I always, again, was comfortable putting myself amongst all types of people or whatever, a myriad of people. It doesn't matter what your cultural background is. It doesn't matter what your nationality, your heritage. Even if we don't speak the same language, I've always been, gifted with just being able to connect with people and kind of get along with people. So it didn't so much bother me, but I wanted a space that was the Black version of that to a great extent. And I say Black specifically because Grand Rapids tends to take focus away from the Black community in a lot of ways, where it's like if you go along to get along, you will be fine, you will get along, everything will be good for you, everything will be good with you. But the second you rebel or you find yourself outside of whatever the various norms are, you find yourself, in a sort of fight, and you begin to look at the people around you a little bit differently. So when I say Black space, I don't know the last time I spoke to somebody from Grand Rapids that felt comfortable speaking specifically about whatever the Black issue was without adding "and people of color" or Black and brown or Black and LGBTQIA, right? It's never just Black. And that was my experience growing up, and that was my experience with the literary and spoken word scene to a great extent. There was a show put on by 2 brothers by the name of Lou Gibbs and Sid Swift which was a space formerly known as The Drink. It was on Monroe. They did a show for a minute, but there was not a Black cultural hub for literature and for free thought the way that Morning Star existed. For everybody, of course, but it wasn't, you kind of read the writing on the wall, and people aren't necessarily, just because everybody in the room looks the same, that's not an indictment on the people in the room, but that's just to say that from somebody that does not look like the people in the room, you notice that, right? Way more than the people in the room would. And I just wanted that sort of space, and I wanted that sort of freedom to express issues that were going on in our community, to borrow from Planet Fitness, a judgment-free zone, And feel free to edit Planet Fitness out. I did just get a membership, though, so I've been working out a lot. So it was important to me. A couple of things were important to me. I wanted it to be in a business that was Black owned. And I wanted it to be in a space where they did not edit the people that were on stage or censor the people that were on stage. And connecting with my cousin and good friend, Jonathan Jelks, and he connected me with a gentleman by the name of Jamel Eddy, and a sister by the name of Sarah Brooks. And together we started a show at a coffee house called the Urban Beanery, where it's over on Madison and Hall. it's a different business now. It's smell goods, and there's a barber shop next to it. But at the time, it was a coffee shop. And spoke with the owners. They were, open to the idea. They didn't really know how to do it. I assured them that, I was going to take care of everything and that they didn't have to worry about anything. I looked them, dead in their eyes and just reassured them that, that their business was, safe with me being somewhat of a cultural usher, And I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but they didn't know I didn't know what I was doing. And sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it. So I, began hosting this show, and lo and behold, people started coming out. And it was the intention, when I say a Black space, and when I talk about Black ownership and these different things, the beautiful thing about being pro-Black is it's not anti-anybody else. In the history of the world, pro-Black has never been anti-white, it's never been anti-brown, it's never been anti, really anything, because Black is inclusive of everything. So when you create spaces, especially when you speak of spoken word and the oral tradition, dates back in, Africa first, hundreds of thousands of years before other places in the world, and the tradition of being a griot and telling the stories of the village and passing those stories down. Those are African traditions. So when we think about poetry and we think about spoken word, of course you have your Shakespeares, you have your Dantes, these amazing writers, your Homers throughout history. You also have your Sundiatas and your Diops and people that predated, all of the Western, literary greats. So I took it upon myself to kind of shine a light on what I found to be an underspoken about and underappreciated community that I happened to find myself a part of. And the rest is kind of history. It ended up being a great show. We kept it going for 7 years, for as long as the coffee shop was open. And it was the kind of springboard into my, hosting tenure and being an MC and having a responsibility to write poems for other people at the time, as opposed to just writing poems, for myself. There's nothing more awkward than having to host a show like consistently, and you just went through a bad breakup, so every poem that you read for the next 3 months is a terrible breakup poem, but you're still trying to host and trying to keep everybody's morale up. It doesn't really work like that, right? So you find yourself having to have pieces where, I do not feel like this today, but I'm gonna do this because I can tell the audience does not like me right now, and I need them to like me because it's the beginning of the night. Right? Or there's nobody here, but I got to do a piece. So I'm going to do a piece even though there's one person. I know if I do this piece, there's going to be 2 people by the end of this piece. And then if 2 people come, then more people are going to come. So you just have to it's been such a labor of love for me, but it's taken a lot as well, because not being able to focus on being 100% artist, 100% poet, and having to focus on being a host and the politically correct nature of, hosting these different things, it can put you on opposite sides of, of the spectrum per se. It's a responsibility to tell the story, the true story. The interesting thing about, being Black, you don't necessarily control your own narrative, culturally speaking. There aren't Black news networks that are feeding Black communities, news. Even the ones that are, Black appearing or whatever, they're not Black owned necessarily, right? So if the oral tradition, there was a huge oral tradition, of course, in Africa, as well as a written tradition. But the oral tradition, as far as Black people in America is concerned, dates back to, slavery, where if you're trying to organize a rebellion and you're trying to get everybody out of this room, by the time somebody goes to sleep, you're not going to write that down, right? You're not going to map it out. You're not going to make copies for everybody. Like, you're not going to do that because somebody is going to leave it out. Somebody's going to see something, right? So the oral tradition in the African-American Black community in America, like in particular, has been, really important, because if we were not able to communicate in our own way, we would still be in bondage, essentially, right? That took a lot of organization to get out of. So fast forward into modern times, the oral tradition is just as important, because, again, we don't necessarily control our own narrative. I think that a lot of, us seek therapy in these artistic spaces. It's like barbershops, beauty salon, and whatever the juke joint is that you can, get whatever off your chest. It could be a comedy club, or it can be, spoken word sort of lounge. But it's important for anybody in any community to be able to tell their story and to feel safe doing so. There's been an emphasis, well, I shouldn't say there always has been, but there's been an emphasis in the past 10 to 15 years, I would say, on safe spaces and making sure that everybody has a safe space. I would argue that the only community in Grand Rapids that consistently does not have safe spaces is the Black community. And spaces that allow for spoken word and that allow for free thought and that allow for messages to be conveyed and questions to be asked without fear of judgment, without fear of having to code switch and speak a certain way, or take the bass out of my voice as to not maybe offend or intimidate somebody that is outside of the culture. It's really important. It's really important to be able to speak your truth. And I say that I think the Grand Rapids, struggles with that. It always has, but it still does, as far as places that are healthy for Black people to come. And it doesn't necessarily have to be art, but just to be able to convey, oh man, today kind of kicked my ass, and I need to tell the story to somebody that looks like me, that might feel like me, that might have a different opinion or something like that. So the necessity of the spoken word in a community like Grand Rapids, and the necessity of all cultures having the ability to convey themselves, is super important. Our brown brothers and sisters are blessed to to speak a language that is one that is, those that speak Spanish aren't speaking the predominant language. So there's a certain freedom to be able to go into places and speak with your family, and knowing that the average person that you pass, doesn't know what it is you're talking about, right? Black people don't have that option to a great extent, unless you're African that, speaks a bunch of different languages. Black Americans, most of us speak the language of the predominant society. So spaces where we are able to come and freely express ourselves without fear of judgment, without fear of an FBI raid, without fear of COINTELPRO, shameless plug, is important. So there just needs to be emphasis on that, and I kind of took it upon myself to emphasize that when I was here organizing as a host and as a poet. Man, Dire Eyes is such a great organization. A lot of wonderful, just beautiful people, that I've just never had a bad, energy from them, in any way. Dire Ives has been kind of one of the, foundational pillars as far as, putting a spotlight on the literary arts, in this community. So it was an honor to, when they, asked me to be a judge, I of course said yes. It's funny because poetry is so subjective, right? And the stuff that I'm sure said, this is absolutely amazing, this is earth-changing, somebody else would be like, I don't even understand this, but the one that you hated, that was absolutely great, right? So there's no such thing as an expert on something subjective, right? There's only, time put into the craft. And I put a lot of time into the craft. So I didn't mind when they, asked me to judge. I didn't think that it was that audacious, but it's really about just telling, your own truth. In any organization like the Dire Eyes Foundation that shines a light on the artists and on the writers and on the innovators and, thought promoters is a beautiful thing. And this community would be in an even better place if there were more organizations like Dire Eyes that had such an emphasis on the literary arts. There are, since I'm bi-coastal or whatever. Like I tell everybody I'm a Grand Rapidian. I was raised here. I went to high school here, at East Kentwood, and most of the people that I love, dearest, live in this community. But I also have an adopted home of Detroit, right? So I'm bi-coastal. I'm on the east side, I'm on the west side. And there are a lot of different initiatives that are aimed at communities that are, so-called at risk, or communities that are disadvantaged or underserved per se. But I think the most effective ones, they all have something to do with either encouraging the youth to read or encouraging the youth to write. I always tell, young people, not even just young people or whatever, like just, you can tell the poets that don't read. You can tell the poets that, that have more output than they have input, right? Like you have to not only be a student of your environment, but you also have to be a student of words, and words are found in books, right? So if someone doesn't take it upon themselves to, humble yourself enough to take somebody else's information in, it can often, limit their own. So in having watched different poets over the years, you can tell the ones that have fed themselves. Strangely and sadly enough, when people come out of the prison system, they come out with such an advanced vocabulary, the vast majority. If you talk to somebody that has been incarcerated for 5, 10 years, and you listen to how they spoke prior to going in, you listen to how they speak after coming out, just the words that they use, there are certain words that we use conversationally that aren't necessarily used in literature, and there are certain words that are used in literature that aren't necessarily used conversationally. And I love talking to, of course it's bittersweet or whatever, but I love talking to brothers and sisters that have been incarcerated because the vocabulary is just off the chain. There's a certain amount of discipline it takes to be out in the free world and to turn your TV off and to put your phone down or put it on silent, vibrate, whatever the case may be, and pick up a book and, just ingest more information. But I think that it's just super important for, artists to do so, and especially young artists that are trying to find their voice. Nothing could be more important in the process than reading. So COINTELPRO's, it is a play on the word COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO was the counterintelligence program that was initiated by the CIA, but it was a CIA-FBI joint project, and it was a program of misinformation and disinformation that was used to infiltrate and neutralize a lot of our most progressive individuals and organizations throughout history. So everything from, it was used to take down Dr. King, Malcolm X, the United States Communist Party, the Black Panthers. And it started in the late 1920s, but it really came into prominence under J. Edgar Hoover, who was just a completely despicable, human being that really worked to demolish a lot of progress of the time. So COINTELPRO's is kind of reappropriating COINTELPRO, and of course prose being poetry, and it is kind kind of a nod to coded language and the power of information, the power of misinformation, the power of accurate information. And it's essentially an assortment of some of my most just revolutionary, what we have to do as a people to take down the man sort of work. I was initially doing a book that just had a bunch of poems about some of everything, but my good friend and co-host of our show in Detroit, Art in the Fly Space, Dismantle, he told me, no one's gonna read your 300-page poetry book. I was like, thanks. So I decided to theme things a little bit, and I wanted my first theme to kind of be a lot of the poems that I'm most impressed by are my more revolutionary pieces because they come out of a place of very real frustration, right? And that's some of your best work as an artist. So I wanted to put some of my best work first. So that's where COINTELPROS comes from. I'm also working on a book. I'm working on a children's book, and I'm also working on a book called Verb Apples, which is going to be my a bunch of poems about relationships and love and failed relationships that that still exist to this day, and kind of everything in between. And it's like a softer side of things. But I want to get the angst and anger out in the forefront first, and then we're going to follow with love, and then we're going to have something for the children afterwards. So I really like this piece. This is one of my more my less spoken word, more written word, sort of classic poetry pieces. I try to not have any two poems sound too much the same. I really try to stretch myself as an artist to have a diverse just palette and a lot of range when it comes to my writing. So this is one of the more classically written poems that I don't know. I really like this piece. It's called Skeletons of Elephants. Skeletons of Elephants. And it's essentially dedicated to whatever anybody's deepest secret is. The skeleton of the elephant in the closet of your room that's ever present, ever decaying, ever gnawing at your soul. You try to render it irrelevant, yet omnipresent is its hold. The skeleton of the elephant in the closet in your soul. All-encompassing and cumbersome, it'll haunt you till your tomb. Postpartum won't cease the depression, your mother will feel it in her womb. You'll forever strive for peace, yet will incessantly be consumed by the skeleton of the elephant in the closet of your room. That keeps you awake in the night, like the absence of darkness minus the moon. The sun no longer peeks through your blinds in the morning, always midnight, never noon. You try to find bliss inside your space again, sadly to find there's only gloom, because there's a skeleton of an elephant in the closet in your room. Solitude will forever follow you, even in the most crowded of rooms. And in the quietest of spaces in your skull, you'll hear the boom. They'll eventually call you crazy, because only you will know the truth, that there's a skeleton of an elephant in the closet of your room. Don't stop writing. Start writing and just don't stop writing. And don't question whether or not you're a poet in the times that you don't write. Just know that if you've ever written anything and you've impressed yourself by it, that's enough to claim poet. For people to claim you as a good poet, it requires dedication, it requires repetition, it requires documenting your journey. I did not do a good job at documenting my journey. I've had a lot of phenomenal shows that I really only have, the story and maybe, the flyer from a show with, the great Gil Scott Heron that did not happen because it was the day after his 67th birthday, and he went out and had a good time the night before, and he missed his flight, and thusly missing our show. And I have a phone conversation with him, whatever. We talked. He said that he, couldn't wait to work with me. He was just, saying this stuff or whatever because he, didn't make his flight, so he felt bad. But he was saying, yeah, I'm going to work with you. We can record something, young blood, this, that, and the third. And I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to, record something with the great Gil Scott Heron. He passed away like 3 months after that, and we never got the opportunity to meet. I have a lot of stories like that where great things just happen, but there's no tangible proof of it. So documenting one's journey is really important. Documenting the stuff that you don't even think that is going to mean anything, or if you don't know how to use it at the time, right? But if you just feel something important is happening, document your journey. It's a lot easier now in the day and age of, cell phones and cameras being on, all of our devices. When I, started, you had to be intentional on setting up a camera, or else whatever, was happening wasn't getting recorded. But now everybody has a device. So I think the next generation, we're just gonna be inundated with so much great art and so many great moments that are captured that, my generation, unless it was very intentional, didn't have the ability to capture. So write, read more than you write, document your journey, and don't say what you think people want you to say unless you're hosting. Don't get booed off of your stage by saying what you want to say if you're hosting. But as an artist, be fearless in your craft and be fearless in your message. Reject politically correct culture without being an asshole. But reject politically correct culture and reject the status quo. Push the limits of language and make people think. Don't be here for people's comfort. Be here for people's progress. Be here for the progress of your culture. Be here for the progress of your community. And write use your imagination, but write from a place of honesty. Even if you're writing fiction, write from a place of honesty. Because it comes off in your art when you don't. When you set out to make a pop song, those are some of the worst records or whatever. Like the greatest pop music are the joints that accidentally become popular or don't have that sound, but everybody just loves. So if you create a pop piece, if you go viral, let it be because it was just that dope, or you were just that talented, or it was just that different. Not because you did the same thing that everybody else did and, you did the same thing they did well, because that doesn't push the boundaries, that doesn't push the culture, and that doesn't push the craft. Poetry in Grand Rapids has changed. Scenes change because artists change, hosts change, people that cultivate scenes change. There was a time that I had a show in Kalamazoo every Tuesday, a show in Grand Rapids at the Hookah Lounge every Wednesday, and I was going back and forth, and I felt like this is after Greg Bliss, stopped hosting at Morning Star. And this is prior to Fable and Foster and Gleason's hosting at not Hopcat, but Stella's. Thank you, at Stella's. So there was a time period of about 5 years or so where I was, and I don't say this with an ego, but it's very much like I was running back and forth doing a lot of the hosting in the scene. So a lot of the scene kind of went through me, so to speak, just by virtue of me being the only person that was hosting at the time. That was cool when I was younger. I didn't mind driving to Kalamazoo. I didn't mind, whatever. But it's not necessarily the best thing when an entire scene is on the shoulders of one person. The beauty of, I think, a city really in general is its diversity and diversity of thought. Like, I think we're better when, we can go on Tuesdays to, the southwest side of the city and maybe go to, a Mexican, open mic where they're doing spoken word. Even if you don't speak Spanish, it's just nice to be able to, catch that energy and see what's going on. Same with, every community or whatever just should have their own sort of spoken word space. Grand Rapids tends to leave it up to whoever is just most passionate at the time. There was a time that was, Lou and Sid. There was a time that was Greg Bliss. There was a time that was Dave Landrum. There was a time that was, myself. Now this is the time that, the diatribe has, a lot of juice and a lot of pull as it pertains to the culture. The beautiful thing about the diatribe is it's multiple people. And that intrinsically, is diversity within its own right. But I do think that some of the steps that I was intentional on taking in regards to safe spaces for Black art and safe spaces for Black artists, I think that the city has slipped to a great extent because there just has to be an intentionality across the board. So I'm hopeful that spoken word in Grand Rapids will encompass everybody and will continue to encompass everybody and grow, and that nobody will be the Michael Jackson of it. There won't be a Michael Jackson and Prince of it, but there will be a multitude of, people that create a scene and that perpetuate the culture and tell their own respective truths. Everybody in a room is not going to, agree, especially if we're not like a religious, small religious cult or something like that. If you get people in a room that are artists in particular, or that are writers, you should have a diversity of thought. If you find yourself in a room where all of the writers are thinking the same way and kind of feeling the same way, you're probably in a stagnant space, right? So you want to make sure that, culture is getting pushed, that people aren't getting comfortable. And another thing that I'm really passionate about, and we have a culture of, this culture was created from the retort at Stella's, and I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world, belling people off stage that are not doing what someone on stage is supposed to do. It can seem harsh, but I think that it makes writers better, because although it can be terrible to be a newbie up there for the first time and your paper's shaking and you're like this and you can't get the words out, those aren't the people that get belled off, and those aren't the people that should get belled off, because a bad experience like that could be the difference between somebody that grows to be, a Saul Williams versus somebody that never gets on stage again just because they had one bad experience. So we want to make sure that people are belled off the stage for the right reasons. I've seen people get belled off because people disagreed with the premise of the poem or the person's opinion on whatever it was that they were talking about. And that makes me cringe, right? I think that we are all better by listening to each other in full. And if you want to rebut something that someone says in a poem, write a poem. And if you're not as good of a writer and you're frustrated because you're really passionate and they really offended you and you just can't get it together, take time. Take time, lit that light of fire under you to become a better writer. And once you have it together, take that same stage. But you wouldn't want to be belled off for your different opinion, just as the person that sparked that fire and you shouldn't be belled off for theirs. So if we're belling for the purity of the craft and to make sure that no one's wasting anybody's time up there, that's one thing. But we need to allow as much diversity of thought as possible in those sorts of spaces. We just have to be intentional to not be the monolith that we can fall into in our comfort zones, right? In our families, in our neighborhood, we have our routines. Might walk up the street with your girlfriend or whatever every morning at 9 o'clock. It's what you do. You go and get a coffee, you go and read the paper, and then you come back home. Cool, that's what you do. It's comfortable. That's how you survive. That's how you stay safe. Wonderful. But as far as art is concerned, we need people that are willing to strip their clothes, get butt naked in the middle of 28th Street and run diagonally through traffic because it's going to progress the culture. Comfort does not progress culture, and a lot of us in Grand Rapids are just a little bit too comfortable. So embracing those that come in and kind of shake up the status quo, not shunning them and making them feel less than or that they should go somewhere else. My caveat to that is, if someone's just being rude for the sake of being rude, if someone's just being abrasive for the sake of being abrasive, if someone's being disrespectful, if somebody is intentionally disrespecting somebody, that's something completely different. But if someone comes up with a contrarian opinion, or if somebody has something that doesn't necessarily bode well with your consciousness, that's a learning opportunity, and that should be an opportunity to grow. It shouldn't be an opportunity to discriminate against someone or make them feel as though they don't belong in the space. This piece is probably about 12 years old, 12, 13 or so years old. But it's so relevant, unfortunately. So it's called Generalizations of a Generation. My generation was filled with rebels whose only cause was rebellion. So many causes went neglected and fell into oblivion, and opinionated people with miseducated opinions, a domesticated people convinced they had no dominion. My generation was filled with men and women who sought the truth with their eyes closed, fishing for religion in waters too shallow for God to flow, yet it was deep enough for my generation to drown in. My generation was filled with politicians that manipulated politics, capitalists who participated in politics, so my generation was filled with politicians that were capitalist. My generation's politics were capitalism. My generation occupied Wall Street. But my generation also occupied Walmart, and those who occupied failed to laser in on one single problem, so the beam did not remove my generation's tumors, it only shed light. My generation destroyed the environment. Then my generation became environmentalist. My generation hated poverty, but my generation was disproportionately poor. My generation hated poverty, but not as much as it hated its poor, because my generation kept its poor impoverished. My generation allowed Dr. King's legacy to be summed up in 5 minutes worth of sound bites. My generation also allowed a 500-year struggle to be summed up as Dr. King's legacy. My generation was full of social networkers, but my generation was socially awkward. My generation was on the computer all of the time, but my generation was still overwhelmingly illiterate. My generation fought to use the word nigger. My generation was ignorant. My generation didn't take care of its kids. My generation were kids when they had kids. My generation called its woman out of her name. My generation was filled with a bunch of numbers, no names. My generation neglected its sisters. My generation feared its brothers. My generation locked its brothers in its prison. My generation made prison an industry. Thus, my generation gave those that filled its prisons an incentive. My generation had fear of countries that never attacked us. My generation caused turmoil. My generation backed rebels without a cause. My generation's cause was oil. My generation raped Palestine, but my generation did not see it on TV. So my generation did not know because my generation did not read. My generation overthrew Mubarak and killed Gaddafi, and my generation meddled in the Middle East. Then Egypt and Libya and Palestine and Syria became more violent than my generation had ever seen. My generation's music was digital, even when it was acoustic. My generation's cameras were excessive and its talent was elusive. My generation thought that TV was reality. My generation lived vicariously. My generation was cellular. My generation cloned its meat. My generation gave dogs and cats immunity, but swine and cows were better known as pork and beef. My generation gave itself cancer. My generation damaged its health. My generation made healthcare expensive. My generation equated life with wealth. My generation was pregnant with potential. My generation aborted itself. Generalizations of a generation via future hindsight if we don't save it. Man, this is so important, and I'm glad that you guys are doing it. Like, I mean, by you guys, I mean specifically who's doing it, because you have been putting in work in this community, in the literary arts for a long time. And a lot of times we let other people tell our stories for us, but this is an example of us telling our story, our own story, right? And I know you guys set it up intentionally for that, and you know, this is that. A lot of times, you know, there's a African proverb: when an elder passes away, a library burns down. You know, and you have a lot of people who are a part of this community today that aren't necessarily going to be here tomorrow, and they're super important, right? So to tell, you know, the story of how poetry has been a part of this community since forever, and to utilize the people that have been a part of that culture is brilliant. And my hat is off to you, even though it's on. Grand Rapids wise, man, there are some really phenomenal MCs and poets that, if they were in a larger market, would have the potential to be household names. But because the spotlight is a little bit smaller and we're not necessarily known for that, there hasn't been the Berry Gordy, right, to create our Motown. But there are some absolute, just incredible artists from here. There's a brother that I met him 3 times. I don't know where he went. I've looked for him online. I have no idea where he went, but he went by the name Paper Thin. And he pulled up to me and my homeboy Martin one day and like popped his trunk and like played a beat and rapped, and absolutely changed my life. It was the most just raw, energetic, think like DMX, right? But with like with a smooth sort of flow, without the gruff voice, but the same sort of energy. This is Al Green's hometown, right? Like, who can say that they haven't grooved to love and happiness and been inspired by that, you know? The Barge, Switch, right? Like, I can watch a Floyd Mayweather fight and become inspired because he's the best that there is, right? And he's from here. He's from our hometown. Poetry, again, in the words of our friend Cesar Toriano, can be anything, and anything can be poetry. And even more so than being poetry, anything can inspire poetry, right? So there are just a ton of people. Yourself, Fable, my brother Tone, Course Grade Bliss, Lou Gibbs, Sid Swift, Dave Landrum, Marcelata Muhammad. There are a lot of people. My little brother Jomo. There are a lot of people. In high school, there was There were two people in particular. Big Corey, who was part of Convotronics, and his brother by the name, he goes by Q, a poet's poet. Both of them were so far ahead of their time. And I just used to listen to them in the lunch line. And they would just like freestyle for all lunch. And then like they would freestyle for like lunch would be 30 minutes. They would freestyle for like 27 minutes. And then you would have 3 minutes to like do whatever it is that you like had the opportunity to do. I just remember them laughing at me like so many times, laughing me out of the lunchroom or whatever. I was so frustrated. Like, man, I thought that was fresh. And they just laughed at me. I'll never forget, I had a line, I flossed so much, you probably thought I lost my toothbrush. When I wrote that joint down, I was like, ooh, I'm about to kill him with this. And I spit it, and they were like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they laughed at me, dog. They laughed at me. And those sorts of things, if they don't kill you, will make you stronger. And Grand Rapids, like, I owe Grand Rapids everything as far as making me the writer that I am, making me the poet that I am, and the inspiration that I receive from this place is limitless. In the 43 states, performed in 43 states. Man, that's a crazy question. Man, I don't know. I would probably say, upwards of 10,000. And then they're the same. Then some of them are the same mic, too, right? Like but like separate microphones, 7 to 10. The dope thing about poetry is it allows you a community of people wherever you go when you're a poet. When you're a spoken word artist, like, I have safely couch surfed in so many places. Left things unattended, never had anything stolen, have been well fed, well taken care of from people that didn't know how they were going to pay the artist, and I was the artist. You know, there's a community, there's a camaraderie, especially when you are not a part of the community, but you're a part of the community. So when you're a traveling poet, the poetry community will take better care of you than the poetry community will take care of you once you're a part of the poetry community. That's when competition and ego and all types of other stuff. But as a traveling artist going from place to place, the poetry community is a safe space and full of individuals that will help you in any way that they can. They'll literally give you the shirt off their back. Yeah, so it's taken me a lot of places, man. I've as I said before, I've had conversations with the late great Gil Scott Heron. Shared the stage with Saul Williams. Have shared the stage and conversed with the last poets. Man, Common in Chicago. Just some of everything. A lot of really cool stuff. When you are respected as an artist, like especially when people can say, when you get off stage, like with me, a lot of the stages I was on, especially before there was really a spoken word scene like that here, I was following hip hop acts, I was following bands, I was following acoustic guitars, I was following whatever. Like, so I had to be convincing and captivating enough with just my words, without a bass-heavy bass line, anything like that. And it really sharpened my skills, and it sharpened my stage presence, and it just made me a more well-rounded artist than I would have been if I just set out to write poetry for a book, or if I just, set out to, write poetry for a journal or something like that. So that was an important piece as well, man. And, Grand Rapids was invaluable in that it kind of created a monster, because if I was somewhere that had a scene, I would probably sound like other poets. First open mic that I had the courage to hit was Greg's spot, Morning Star. Yep, that was my first real introduction into, from a spoken word perspective. I had seen spoken word artists get up at karaoke night, you know what I'm saying, like that sort of thing. But as far as the spoken word space is concerned,
did that go well in Grand Rapids?
No. I mean, that's not gonna go well anywhere, man. It's some stuff is just a struggle. Man, I've done comedy clubs that were that were hard too, man. Like, cause there's nothing worse. There's nothing. It's not even necessarily worse, but funny comedian, the whole audience laughing, blah 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 blah. Next up to the mic, this poet. Mo, okay? You know what I'm saying? Like that sort of stuff makes you, it either breaks you or it makes you, My first feature, the first open mic that I hosted was Urban Beanery. That was Urban Beanery on Madison and Hall. Yep. Think I might have done something I hosted a open mic at Calvin College and GRCC and that sort of thing. But as far as consistently my show, that was the first open mic that I ever hosted. Feature? I think my first feature might have been Morning Star as well. Might have been Greg's spot. I believe it was, man. But that's why I refer to him as a mentor and big brother, man. We've, outside of our friendship, man, we've had some just wild, great, times and conversations. He was really integral in supporting me in my journey to kind of do what he was doing, right? There was never any hate. There was never any, you're taking people from my space. Never anything like that. It was, when I had my open mic at Urban Beanery, he would come on my night, and I would still continue to come on his, right? So there was just that dope camaraderie. Too often, people that do similar things end up competing, and the young up and coming person or whatever, the older cat that's been there should be mentoring, but they end up competing for whatever reason, right? And that's not the best way to do things if you want a culture of continuity and you want to build a scene. So Greg just always, he opened, his arms and opened his show and opened his, his scene to me, and would answer any question that I had, anything like that or whatever. So, I always, have my proverbial hat off to him as well for that. Man, Professor Cope is, he is a loving pillar of support mixed with healthy criticism. He is, man. He's this old hippie that has always been, he's also been one of the ones that's just always been there. He published me for the first time. My first time ever being published as a poet was him, taking some of my works, and I took his class after I was, published in this work with him. It was him, myself, and some former poet laureates, and he, played the professor role and the educator role, of course, but he also was really humble with me, right? And he would just kind of level as a as a writer and give like constructive criticism, but he would also like ask me things that, you know, empowered me to know that my opinion mattered to him as well, even though he was, you know, this gentleman that, you know, has lived to a time that I only hope to live, you know? So yeah, a gentle giant and a hell of a writer, but also a great support system. He showed me that I could be published before I really even thought about doing so, you know, and it led to, you know, me self-publishing, you know, years later down the road. So he's played an amazingly supportive role in my journey as an artist as well. Man, that was an incredible time, man. Shout out to Mr. Lockington, who was the maestro of the symphony at the time, for you know, inviting me to do so. But yes, did a spoken word piece with the Grand Rapids Symphony. That was very rarely am I nervous taking the stage. I'm comfortable or whatever. It's kind of like a, you know, a superpower. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm, for whatever reason, on stage, like I'm I'm at home. But that was a different feeling. And the symphony is so precise. There wasn't any talk or room for improvisation. So it's one of those things that, you know, I had to, when it started, start, and I had to be on point with, you know, every word where it was supposed to hit, and you know, kind of ride the rhythm, and it worked out really well. But I'm really glad that is behind me and not ahead of me. Although, if anybody from the symphony wants to work with the poet, I'm definitely will have it ahead of me as well. But yeah, I'm glad to. That was cool. Love Jones by a landslide, because Saul Williams is one of those people, and I say this with the utmost respect. It's 100% compliment. He's too smart for me to understand him. I didn't get Slam. I don't get a lot of his poetry. I know, you know, but like Saul is like at a level where I just kind of like just soak his energy in, but conversationally, I have a hard time. He's almost like a Russell Brand sort of mind that is just like, just hitting in so many different, and I'm, you know, kind of like, you know, yeah. So Love Jones was a much more, Love Jones like made poetry cool. Poetry wasn't necessarily cool to me before then. Between Love Jones and Def Poetry, but Love Jones in particular, because it was I love the movie because it was a traumaless Black love story during a time that you didn't really see that, right? You had, you know, Boys in the Hood, you had South Central, you had, you know, these different movies or whatever that when they depicted our relationships, they only depicted toxicity. Love Jones was, you know, just about middle-class Black people in Chicago trying to make it and falling in love in the process. And Nia Long, being the protagonist, she's like so beautiful, right? So him attracting Nia Long with that poem made me memorize it. So yeah, that's Love Jones, man. Love Jones. But respect to Saul, man. But I understand. Love Jones just struck at my heartstrings in a different way, and it was easier to digest than Slam. Ghetto Alchemy. There's a quote before all of the poems in my book as well. The quote before this one is, "A wise man once said that Black people behave like crabs in a bucket, but a wiser man realized that a crab's natural habitat is not a bucket." So, if you combine fire and water, you get steam. If you combine honey and milk, you get cream. If you combine honey and cream, you get coffee. Reset. If you combine liquor and poverty, you get alcoholism. If you combine unemployment and needs, you get dependence. If you combine liquor and dependence and poverty, you get crime. If you combine crime and police, you get time. If you combine baking soda and cocaine, you get crack. If you combine man and woman, you get couple. If you combine man and child, you get father. If you combine man, woman, and child, you get family in the traditional sense. If you combine family and poverty, you get welfare. If you combine family, poverty, and welfare, you get dependence. If you combine man and time, you get prison sentence. If you combine poverty and child, you get statistic, reset. If you combine prison sentence and time, you get felon. If you combine felon and needs, you get job. If you combine felon and poverty, you get robbed, reset. If you combine unemployment and man, you get child. If you combine unemployment, man, and child, you get ridiculed. If you combine unemployment and family, you get welfare. If you combine greed and victim, you get capitalism. If you combine prison and capitalism, you get prison industry. If you combine poverty and guns, you get violence. If you combine violence and police, you get riots. If you combine family and alcoholism and poverty and unemployment and crime and police and baking soda and cocaine and greed and man and woman and child and statistics and victims and ridicule and prison and police and felon, you get the ghetto. Reset. If you combine people and fire, you get anger. If you combine liquor and fire, you get riot. If you combine anger and strategy, you get revolution. If you combine apathy and people, you get silence. Ghetto alchemy. We find ourselves, at the opposite end of a bad stick a lot of times as far as the police go. But there is nothing more strange and sobering than being somewhere where when you get off the bus, you're being whisked into like random parts of the city and you're being told to write certain numbers on you because if the police grab you, this is what this is and this, that, and the third, blah, blah, blah. It was such a crazy scenario to have the police be the people that you were organizing against, right? And we were able to do so, somewhat effectively. But I've seen a lot of things just in my, journeys, throughout America, growing up in Grand Rapids, dealing with just, racism. It's said to be, West Michigan nice. And I know West Michigan nice isn't necessarily a term that has to deal specific with like race relations, but it definitely ties in, right? You kind of, go along, get along, you smile at Susan, at the market, and then you say, man, I can't stand Susan. You know what I'm saying? Under your breath, right? There's a certain aspect of that, right? And, when it comes to, race, a lot of times in Grand Rapids, I felt more tolerated, right, than wanted. And it's one of those things that I'm one of those people. I'm going to be wherever it is I am anyway, but I'm going to, document my journey. And I don't really do things very specifically. So, like, I don't know specifically what energy, I don't know what situation made me write that poem, but I know the energy around what made me write that poem, So it's, racism, it's oppression, it's seeing, it's having to organize a resistance against the, police in 2018, right? After, 400 years in this country and still to have to organize around something so, knuckle-draggingly, archaic should be an embarrassment to everybody, right? And it should be something, so it's a black eye, on this country. So as long as things like that are going on, I have unlimited resources to pull from to write pieces like that. I hope that Ghetto Alchemy, I hope they read that and they're like, crack, what happened? I hope that the problems of today get solved 200 years from now. Realistically,
we're behind.
We're behind. But realistically, like, if at the very least, like, the artist in me wants someone to read my work and say that, this person had control of language, this person, was concise, this person, had a vast vocabulary and an ability to articulate what it is that they were, trying to say. That's what my ego wants, right? And maybe a statue next to Stanley Ketchel, because for some reason the Mayweathers don't have one, but that's just, you go edit that out too, it's fine. Okay. But yes, I don't necessarily need a statue. I just want somebody to, read my work and respect the writer. Even if you don't agree with, all the content, just, respect the writer. And it would be nice for my work to bring generational wealth, one day. I would love to be able to say that, something that I wrote or something that I, influenced had such tangible benefit that things could be made easier for, the people that are, most vulnerable around us. That's something that's important to me as well. A lot of times, and I know you can attest to this, being an artist, you are stretched so thin having to make ends meet, right? You had a, open mic or whatever that you hosted, they got over, you got home at, 2:00, and then you have to be up at, 6:00 to, get your baby off to school, and then you gotta get off to work, right? Sabbaticals, writers' retreats, right? Being able to afford yourself the time and the headspace to actually concentrate on your craft is something that's like really, that's become more and more, important to me. I would have 100 books if I didn't have to have, if I didn't have to spend so much time on doing things. So one of the reasons why I like what the Diatribe is doing, and what you guys are doing is so important, and Dire Ives as well, is you are creating an environment where the next generation can potentially get paid for their talents in a way that our generation, couldn't, unless we got really, creative. Because this sort of stuff is important. The opinions of the day are important, but they shouldn't have to necessarily take place as a hobby when you have a certain, acumen and you have a certain level of, consistency and resilience with your craft. Eventually, there should be a mechanism that allows for you to focus on it more. Little known Diatribe history fact: I named the Diatribe.
It's true.
Because I think it's one of the best names for an organization doing the work that it's doing, like, ever. So, like, I'm proud. Every time I see it, I'm proud of, specifically of the name. But that's my ego as a poet and as a writer, right? But what you're doing is important, man. Like, you're paving the way and making things easier for the next generation of writers and creatives and thinkers. And the nature of the diversity with the people at the helm of the group, I think, is really important. And it's something really important for Grand Rapids to see. Y'all basically are like Captain Planet and his homies, and I think it's, it's a beautiful thing. There's a little, bit of something for, everybody. And I'm excited for what the future holds. And I know that you all have, the organizational prowess and are developing the connections and the energy behind your movement to really take it to a place that when we were just a couple people looking to enter our prize, couldn't have even really fathomed, you know? I think that was maybe like 3 art prizes in, like a third one, the one we entered, yeah. First blind deaf friendly art prize exhibit. Just thinking of inclusion, man, is so important. I was introduced to a term by a elder in Detroit, Baba Baxter, who was in a car accident and is paralyzed. Ableism, all right? He was saying how ableist of a community and a city Detroit is. How nothing is built for people that can't get out of their car with their legs and see and hear everything, right? Nothing in the city is built for people in that way. We were sadly ahead of our times with that, right? Because it should just be, when we talk about inclusion, people just tend to only think about the majority of people. So thinking about people that you don't necessarily have to think about. I admire, say, Michael J. Fox, right, for being a champion in finding a cure for Parkinson's. Nobody should say anything negative about that. But the true sign of a humanitarian to me is somebody that's not directly affected by something that still is running full speed ahead to make sure that those who are taken care of. You know, so I think that having the first blind, deaf, friendly, art prize exhibit, even though, I mean, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? But I think that was just a very important gesture, and I hope that it sparks, artists in the future and people, in the future to, carry on in the trek for just equity and equality. Because it's in classrooms, whether it's intentional or not, right? Kids are listening to their favorite song. If it's hip hop, it's even more, direct or whatever, and a lot of music, especially hip hop, has messages that are contrary to something that, or at least something that a younger person an impressionable person should not be taking in fully, right? So putting poetry in classrooms allows you to control the narrative. It allows you to say, like, yeah, you can rap, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about this, that, and the third. You can also rap about healthy eating. You can rap about a healthy lifestyle. You can rap about how you feel today and you're feeling good, And, whether it manifests itself as, hip-hop, rap, whether it manifests itself as, prose, it makes writing cool and it makes writing less intimidating. One of the things that I disliked about math, and although I'm not taking exception to what my big brother Greg Bliss said, that poetry is math, one of the things that I love about poetry and hated about math is that math is so confining, right? Like, you can't argue your point in math. Like, 1 + 1 is 2 no matter what I say. You know what I'm saying? So with, poetry, it allows us to kind of argue, our points. And I love writing a poem about something that doesn't seem like it's about something, because that's like the whole Animal Farm, sort of, putting the medicine in the candy. It just has limitless possibilities as far as like whether you're trying to push an agenda, whether you're trying to get a point across, whether you're just trying to get a thought out, the opportunities are limitless. I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the arrhythmic cadence akin to the palpitations of the ventricle passage. I said I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the arrhythmic cadence akin to the palpitations of the ventricle passage. Sonic, the homonyms and homophones, the sonic tones, the chronic smoke, just hitting your nose, hitting your face, hitting your throat, making you choke, all of the wow. It'll be vibrating past you. All right, I said I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the arrhythmic cadence akin to the palpitations of the ventricle passage. Sonic the homonyms and homophones, the sonic tones, the chronic smoke, that's hitting your nose, hitting your face, hitting your throat, making you choke, all of the wow. It'll be vibrating past you with the speed of a zebra running from a cheetah. You better believe it, I breathe the smoke of my breath blow past you. All right, I said I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the arrhythmic cadence depend on the palpitations of the... I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the ventricle passage. I said I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the ventricle... Sonic the homonyms and homophones, the sonic tones, the chronic smoke, that's hitting your nose, hitting your face, hitting your throat, making you choke, all of the... Wow. It'll be vibrating past you with the speed of a zebra running from a cheetah. You better believe it, I breathe the smoke of my breath blow past you. Carrying the cadence of English language like linguists, spitting the mingus improvisational genius just so seamless like jazz was. With the pattern that's consistent of rhythmically written assistance that might just leave you breathless infected with asthma symptoms. Said with the pattern that's consistent of rhythmically written assistance that might just leave you breathless infected with asthma symptoms. And then to the stanza, how precision the banter, calligraphy written diction of visions of grandeur, continually on a mission to verbally grab you, or gripping and clench your fists in the air like a panther. Subliminal mind storm, subliminal mind porn, subliminal mind poem, subliminal mind thoughts I'm thinking. Last one. I said I'm penciling you a perfect passage. Persistent pronunciations of the arrhythmic cadence akin to the palpitations of the ventricle passage. Sonic the homonyms and the homophones, the sonic tones and chronic smoke that's hitting your nose, hitting your face, hitting your throat, making you choke, all of the wow. It'll be vibrating past you with the speed of a zebra running from a mother cheetah. You better believe it, I breathe the smoke of my breath blow past you. Carrying the cadence of English language like linguists, spitting the mingus improvisational genius just so seamless like jazz was. With the pattern that's consistent and rhythmically written assistance that might just leave you breathless affected with asthma symptoms. Indented the stanza, how precision the banter, calligraphy written diction with visions of grandeur, continually on a mission to verbally grab you, or gripping and clenching fists in the air like a panther, subliminal mind storm, subliminal mind porn, subliminal mind poem, subliminal mind thoughts I'm thinking. I said I'm thinking that they faking. I said I'm thinking that they faking like assalamu alaikum plus bits of bacon. I said I'm thinking that they faking like assalamu alaikum plus bits of bacon with alaikum salam plus salami. I said I'm thinking that they faking like assalamu alaikum plus bits of bacon with alaikum salam plus salami. Christ with white makeup, pontificating the breakup, assembling these idiots, uttering all of these idioms. My females are so feminist that they no longer feminine. My niggas are so niggly that we no longer men again. I give my people paragraphs instead of longer sentencing. They give my people paragraphs instead of longer sentencing. Leaving life indented, so incidentally mentioned. And the hell is a recession. It's depression up in Michigan. The hell is a recession. It's depression up in Michigan. Penciling you a perfect passage. I love this place, man. This place made me the writer that I am, the man that I am, but definitely the writer and the poet that I am, the performer that I am. Places that aren't necessarily the most artist-friendly oftentimes create the best artists. Because when the stage is friendly, when it's always, available, readily accessible, and the audience is looking for comedy, the audience is looking for blues, the audience is looking for jazz, the audience is looking for hip hop, then it's easy to come and fill in that sort of blank if that's what you do. But Grand Rapids created, spaces that weren't necessarily that poetry friendly for a very, very, very long time. And I always, as I said before, kind of took it up on myself to get on those stages and not be afraid to follow the bands, not be afraid to follow the bass-heavy hip-hop act, not be afraid to follow the comedian, not be afraid to go into church and follow the pastor, which never turns out well. But it's about taking yourself out of comfort zones, because that is how you sharpen your sword, as an artist. And Grand Rapids created a multitude of uncomfortable situations that helped kind of put the pressure, on the stone that I was as a young writer, and, create the diamond that I would like to think that I'm becoming as a writer that ages in the craft. So I love this place. I love the good in it. I love the people in it. And the bad has helped, just kind of mold philosophy, and it has kind of forced me to have sort of uncomfortable conversations with myself that, if I was in an environment that was more utopic, or coming up in an environment that was more utopic, I probably wouldn't have had those sorts of experiences. The best art comes from the struggle, whatever that struggle is, whether the struggle is poverty, whether the struggle is, racism, so-called white supremacy, whether the struggle is, orientation, whatever your struggle is, being able to, the process and the trauma that comes from unpacking that struggle and taking it from your mind through your shoulders and your hands and your fingers into, a page, that's a therapeutic process. Because you're reading it over and over. If you're writing it, you're reading it over and over. And the repetition of the realization of what you're saying can be incredibly just liberating, and therapeutic. And Grand Rapids allowed me the opportunity to do that and express myself. A lot of my journey here was me taking the opportunity in spite of the fact that people didn't want me to get on stage and express myself. But that's hip hop, right? And that's kind of our story. You always say, I'm not for everybody, right? And that's 100%, real. I always feel like that should have been my phrase, but it was yours. But you have to be for self, right? You have to be for your village. You have to be for your community. And Grand Rapids is my community. Grand Rapids will always be my community. Because I love this place so much, I'm passionate about the good, but I'm really passionate about the things that I want to see improve. And I love the work that you're doing. I appreciate the work that the Diatribe is doing. Appreciate the work that Dire Ives is doing. And I want the umbrella to be just broadened to just lit as many people with good intentions and righteous intentions just to progress us collectively. We all should not have to agree to move forward, right? And the beauty of art is we should be able to, as articulators of our own feelings and our deepest thoughts and our deepest insecurities, right? If we're able to articulate those, why can we not articulate through conversations where we don't necessarily see eye to eye? Oftentimes, the difference between ha and hate is whether or not the joke lands, right? And sometimes we as artists need to kind of take a step back when the rest of society isn't as accepting of whatever. Even if the rest of society is moving past a certain point where certain people are getting left behind, the artistic community still has an obligation to connect with the people that are being left behind, because those are some of the people that are making the best art. And we make the mistake of honoring artists and our greats and our thought promoters and our thinkers and the people that are pushing the culture. We honor them after they pass away, right? We don't honor them in real time. So this project is super important. The work that you're doing is super important. And just inviting as many people, as much diversity into the scene and into the culture as possible is super important. Not just as traveling artists, but in leadership positions, really putting people in position to have their own shows, to do different things, to tour. I have a list, and I've given you this list or whatever of, nationwide venues or whatever from across the country. Like, if you have information that could help another artist, especially another local artist, that can shine a light on the scene, man, that we're all working on, like, take that opportunity and just elevate them, because it only elevates the rest of us, especially in a community as small and tight-knit as Grand Rapids should be.